Welcome to Fight Back Radio, a production of fightbacknews.org, taking you to the heart of the people's struggles. I'm your host, Richard Berg, and I want to welcome you all today to our Labor Day 2022 podcast. On Labor Day, we honor the working class. This is a holiday that was fought for by working people, and it was won in 1894 when President Grover Cleveland granted the Labor Day holiday, and he did it because there'd just been a huge strike, a railroad strike of the Pullman Company, and it started in Chicago, but it went national, and it was defeated because President Cleveland sent in federal troops to bust the strike, and he was not very popular amongst working people, and this was his attempt to bring it back. But we'll take this victory, we'll take this holiday, and it was also Grover Cleveland wanted to cover up the May Day holiday, which the fight for the 8-hour day and the Haymarket Affair. And so, those are things that we'll take both of those. And I want to point people back to a Fight Back Radio podcast that we did with Larry Spivak from the Illinois Labor History Society that digs deeply into the Pullman strike and the Haymarket Affair, which established May Day. But also this Labor Day holiday, I wanted to give a special shout out, a special recognition to our healthcare workers. Our pandemic continues, and they've gotten us through it as we have. I mean, the stress and the work that healthcare workers, whether they're home healthcare workers, nursing home workers, work in hospitals, whether they're housekeepers, clerical workers, transporters, certified nursing assistants, RNs, whatever you are, a shout out to you and to all you've done for our country, and of course even workers around the world, all that they've done. And our guest today is particularly a good guest to as we honor our healthcare workers. Today we have Greg Kelley, who stands taller than anybody in fighting for healthcare workers. He's a vice president of the Service Employees International Union and sits on their executive board. He's the president of the 90,000-member SEIU, Service Employees International Union Healthcare, Illinois, Indiana, Missouri, and Kansas. He's also the president of the 150,000-member SEIU Illinois State Board. He sits on the executive board of United Working Families and on the executive board of the Chicago Federation of Labor. And I finally, Greg he's not afraid of a fight. He's not afraid of a fight on behalf of working people. And he's a president who listens to his members. You'll hear in this interview how the members of SEIU Healthcare in Missouri, in Ferguson, Missouri, talked to Greg and to others and demanded that their union take up the issue of community control of the police. And they did. They did it in a real way and were real players across all 4 of those states in trying to make that happen. Greg's a real leader, and I think you'll enjoy this interview. So here's Greg Kelley. Welcome to Fight Back Radio, Greg.
Thank you so much for having me, Richard.
So I wanted to ask you, you're the president of a very large union of healthcare workers, 90,000 members, I understand, across 4 states. And this COVID pandemic, it's affected healthcare workers in major ways, as it has all of us, but healthcare workers especially. Can you talk a little bit about how this has affected your members?
Yep. So SEIU Healthcare, Illinois, Indiana, Missouri, and Kansas is a union of 90,000 nursing home, home care, hospital, and child care workers. And as you correctly stated, this pandemic has truly had an impact on them, where they work and where they live. Some folks can recall that at the beginning of the pandemic, that nursing homes really were considered the epicenter of the pandemic. And we felt that acutely in our union. Our members were without PPE. They were seeing their co-workers as well as residents dying. And of course, nursing home owners and the industry were completely tone deaf to what workers were going through at the very beginning. And so there was a lot of anger and fear about what was going on. And I have to say, that continues to this day, so much so that staffing has been impacted. Lots of workers who might have otherwise worked in a nursing home left the industry altogether. And so you have staffing challenges in so many nursing homes today. But those 2 years have really taught us a lot about healthcare and the delivery of healthcare. Folks called them essential workers. We always called them essential workers. But unfortunately, in this country, we have a very short memory. And so the same issues that cropped up in February of March of 2020 are still very much with us today in 2022. And so our work is really about trying to connect with our members and obviously advocate and fight on their behalf. We've made some significant progress around wages, and we were successful at getting some legislation passed. But be clear, nursing homes in particular, but the entire healthcare delivery system failed workers, and our fight continues. It's just for us a new phase of addressing long-term issues and long-time issues in healthcare delivery and childcare workers as well. So,
yes, I mean, these are often not high-paid workers. Many make below the median income for our country, and the work is very difficult. And what does it look like in a nursing home right now? For example, that now that we're 2.5 years into the pandemic, we have vaccines, and you're right, it got a certain amount of press early on because they were the first places that vaccines were given out, but people haven't talked. It hasn't been in the newspapers and on TV the way it was. What does it look like in a nursing home today?
Nursing homes have changed to an extent. In the state of Illinois, we've had some success at improving wages. The legislature has done good work in setting forth staffing standards for nursing homes. Again, these are things that were fought by our members for many years. So there have been some changes. But if you talk to a nursing home worker today, I suspect that most will tell you that staffing remains a big issue, in part because of the wages and because of the difficulty of the work. And while we've made progress, they still don't make what they deserve. And so, they're understaffed and still underpaid. And they're still very difficult places to work.
Yeah, I know your union has used militant tactics. You've had strikes at nursing homes, and you've come to the edge of strikes more than once for big groupings of nursing homes. And what's the problem here? These are our mothers and fathers and grandmothers and grandfathers. What's the problem that the money's not there, or the owners are just that greedy, or
yes, they are. It's a for-profit industry, which on its own creates its own set of problems. I think it's also true that the workers themselves in our country, we've undervalued the work of Black folks, of immigrants, and women, and so that's part of the story as well. But we did go out on strike a couple of different times. One of the scariest, but also most exhilarating experiences in my career in the labor movement really was around March and April of 2020, when we were preparing to take 10,000 nursing home workers in 120 different sites out on strike. And at the very end, the nursing home owners settled. We got historic agreement, but in the midst of a pandemic, our members were so frustrated and so upset that we were literally going out on strike within hours. Unfortunately, months later, a smaller group of nursing homes, we actually did go out on strike for 2 weeks. And again, in the middle of a pandemic, workers were fed up and continued to fight, and actually went out on strike for quite a number of days, again, to get what should have just been given from the very beginning. But it really changed the dynamics in the industry, at least the union and management. And so that's how we were able to get the changes passed in the last legislative session. the work that our members did in coming together to fight is really how we got what we've gotten so far.
So some of the answer to this then was to get more revenues from the state to flow into the privately held nursing homes.
But also, which we learned, is to make sure that money is specifically earmarked, for lack of a better word, for workers. Because if you just give it to nursing homes and don't provide any strings to it, we've learned that they just use it to pocket the money for themselves. But what's unique about what we were able to accomplish more recently is that there's actually a pass-through that goes directly to worker pay.
So in the pandemic also affected home health workers as well, and that's a large part of your union. Could you talk a little bit about, first, what is a home health worker? Who are we talking about here? And then how did the pandemic affect them as well?
Home care workers, as their name suggests, work with seniors and folks with disabilities in their homes. And foundationally, we believe that folks who want to stay in their home to get care should be allowed to stay home and get care. There's always going to be a need for nursing homes. But we think, particularly as our population continues to age, that folks who want to stay in their homes are able to stay in their homes. And so we're seeing significant growth in home care and the need for home care. In fact, home care worker jobs are among the fastest growing industries in the entire country. And so, as you can imagine, during COVID, as we didn't know so much about how it was transmitted, a lot of care and thought was given to figuring out how to give PPE and proper PPE to home care workers who just didn't have it. Some of them work for the state, but we also have home care workers who work for private agencies. And so there was a hodgepodge way of approaching home care workers and the need to protect them. And so this all, again, nursing homes, home care, all part of the long-term care delivery system that is in deep need of reform. And again, the pandemic just made that more clear to all of us. And so, home care workers fared a bit better, perhaps more quietly because they aren't all in facilities. But make no mistake, they still dealt with the same issues of equipment, need for equipment, and continuing to need to get the type of wages and benefits that they deserve.
So when you say it's in need for reform, are you talking about systemic reform? And if so, what would, if Greg Kelley was governor of Illinois or whatever, a dictator of the world, what kind of reforms would we do for home health care workers?
We would certainly say that they deserve to make more money. I'd overnight make them middle-class jobs, which is, I think, our fundamental responsibility as a union to make sure that we're making that argument. They have been excluded from every national or federal effort to lift wages. And we would, if it was up to me, we'd immediately improve wages for home care workers and professionalize the workforce in a way that they have access to training, that they have benefits, that after they've worked so many years in home care that they can retire with dignity. And so very much the type of things that teachers have fought for over decades is the type of thing that I'd have for home care workers if it was up to me.
So, a lot of, as union people, we believe that everybody should have a living wage. And it sounds like a lot of the fight in your union is because, the healthcare workers, many of your members start out as they enter the union as in jobs that are not at a living wage. And so a lot of your fight is to provide a living wage for the lower sectors of the working class.
That's absolutely true. I would remind folks, it wasn't until maybe 30 years or so that home care workers were sub-minimum wage workers. They weren't minimum wage workers. They made less, significantly less than the minimum wage. In many cases, about $1 an hour up until about 25, 30 years ago, with no benefits to speak of at all. Including health care. And so over these last few decades, our union and all of our amazing members over the years and it actually makes me emotional to think about how our union has come so far, but yet have so much more to do. But they were excluded from the Fair Labor Standards Act, so they had no access to so many things, right? They weren't guaranteed hours. They didn't get overtime pay, et cetera, et cetera. I can go on. And it simply was because of the workers that they are, which is mostly Black and brown and immigrant workers. And so, our work really is about making sure that people understand who home care workers are, why they deserve to be protected, respected, and paid. Their work is essential, and it was essential before COVID. It's even more essential now, given the fact that our country is getting older, and the need for home care workers and a quality home care workforce is even more important now than ever, and will continue only to get greater in importance in the future.
So home health care workers are, it seems like a difficult group to organize because there's not a workplace or a time clock where I can stand there and pass out the flyer and or whatever. And so can you talk a little bit about how you were able to unionize them in the first place? And even now that they're unionized, how do you bring a collective power to a group that goes to a different home every day and may not see each other very often?
Yeah, so Illinois, the former Local 880, pioneered organizing home care workers. It was really through community organizing that they did what they did. I tell the story that there were 7 Black women in the basement of a church who came together, not so much to talk about a union, but to talk about the same issues that they had, which was we're home care workers, we're domestic workers, and what can we do to change not just the work that we do to get more money, but also to make our communities better. And so that's the legacy that our current union sort of operates within. We understand that there's a direct link between improving the work that we do as well as improving our communities. It's not enough to get a couple dollars more in a raise if your community isn't safe, if you can't go and safely exist, or if you can't afford housing. And so these are all part of the legacy of HCII that really came out of how we were created. And so it is very difficult work, but it for us is labor organizing and community organizing together. And that's what we came out of. And today, obviously, we've built over these last 3 or 4 decades significant political strength. And so that has helped us quite a bit. And then we've delivered for workers that we represent. And so, it's a smaller community of workers who are in communication with each other. And just like any organizing effort, leaders lead, they find other leaders, and then we build organization. And that's what we've been able to do, not without serious challenge, not without attacks like those of Bruce Rauner and our Supreme Court. But despite all of those challenges, our members continue to fight and we continue to grow and strengthen our organization.
Yeah, I mean, you were the center of the initial attacks on the right for union security, or basically this Quinn versus Harris
versus Quinn.
Yeah,
that's right.
Which led to a negative Supreme Court decision that attacks all public sector workers.
Janice came out of Harris versus Quinn. That's right.
So for our listeners that don't know all those cases, basically it's an attack on unions and union dues, and so that they have the revenues to function as a union. Let me also ask you then, I want to move to another section of your union, the people that, when people think of healthcare, often they think of people that work in hospitals. Could you talk a little bit about hospital workers and people that actually worked in whether in emergency rooms or, whether there was, CNAs or people cleaning the floors or, transporters or whatever, and how the pandemic affected them and continues to affect them?
Much like nursing homes, workers who worked in healthcare facilities really, took the brunt of the pandemic, particularly at the beginning. But just like nursing homes, the staffing issues that were there in the past continue to exist and have only gotten exacerbated of late. And, most of our members that work in hospitals anyway, work in community-based facilities. We have a big one, Northwestern, the big, rich Northwestern medicine, but similarly situated with respect to nursing home workers. And I would say one of the things that's a little different about hospital and hospital workers compared to nursing home workers, for example, is, and if you've been in the hospital ever, you probably see this, even if you weren't particularly aware or conscious of it, there is a hierarchy in the culture of hospitals that really have a negative impact on the type of workers that we represent, who people refer to as ancillary, people who, as you mentioned, are janitorial. They keep the hospital clean. They're nursing assistants, or they're what they used to call ward clerks, or people who do the scheduling, et cetera. And they are often treated really poorly. And it's because of who they are and what they do. And so our fight, again, not unlike the fight for home care and nursing home workers, really is to lift up the importance of their work, to demand that they get what they need, including pay and benefits. But for many hospital workers, and we only represent a pretty small facet of the hospital industry in our union, it really is a real challenge to build power, because hospitals are growing, they're consolidating. Even though they're technically mostly nonprofit, they operate like corporations. They have CEOs who make tens of millions of dollars. Often joke with, in a bizarre way, with our members about Northwestern, and I show them the salary of Dean Harrison, the longtime CEO of the hospital, and they see it. He makes 10, 11, 12 million dollars a year, which of course is ridiculous and absurd on its own. And then I remind them that he's been making that now for about 15, 20 years.
Right.
And so when you think about it, he's probably come home $250 million, right?
Yep.
And then it puts into really stark view just how absurd the hospital industry is in relation to lower wage workers like the ones we represent.
Well, there's been a change over the years. I think back years ago, there was mostly community hospitals here in Chicago, the Catholic Church, and people would do fundraisers to help the hospital, and it was something that was in the community and owned. And as you mentioned, many of them are not-for-profits even today, but that's a fallacy in a lot of ways, because if your $10 million is going to the CEO, certainly that person isn't thinking about charitable types of things, or I wouldn't think that. A lot of people, who bean counters was the word that was used often to say, as it transformed from community and healthcare professionals to money people. And a lot of folks have called for, blamed the insurance industry, some of them, and called for single payer health insurance. I know Bernie Sanders, when he ran for president, talked about that. Could you talk a little bit about the money issue and single payer health insurance and your views on that?
Single payer, absolutely essential now more than ever. There's so much money in the healthcare industry. It really, these corporations, which is really what they operate, like they have boards, but they are buying up everything. So there's a lot of consolidation in the industry. And Chicago is an interesting place. It's different from California, for example, or even New York, where there's, again, solid density, about union density amongst those hospitals. In Chicago, as you mentioned, the community-based health system is really on its last, legs. But what you see happening, though, is the Northwesterns, the University of Chicago's, the Advocates now, instead of they are now building their own sites in communities, and so creating their own new streams of revenue, and not really being forced to do the right things in terms of providing care for those communities. we represent a number of community-based hospitals, on the south and west sides of Chicago. They struggle. And every year we go to Springfield, to the Capitol, to argue for more funding for them, to keep them open. And that's an ongoing struggle. We've had some success, but the community hospital system is much, much smaller than it was even 15 years ago, 20 years ago in our region. And the ones that are left, as I said, are struggling. And I just think the priorities of our state and our country need to be different. We need to make sure that these corporations, are held accountable. That's the work that we're trying to engage in. But it's very, very difficult. They've gotten smarter because they've got a lot of money. They have strong lobbying arms and efforts. But we keep trudging along and trying to make a dent. Our members really understand. And if you talk to a hospital worker, and Richard, you'll appreciate this, they instinctively understand that there's something wrong with the way that hospitals function. The care of patients isn't the number one priority. It's about money and protecting, they wouldn't call profits, but it's certainly profits. We need to make sure that those workers' voices are heard as the pressures around managed care and pharmaceutical companies, all those things play a part as well. But we need to make sure that we hold hospital leadership as well as our political leadership accountable.
So some of this calls for a political solution. And it's not just, obviously we're fighting for a living wage, you're organizing people on the job, but some of these things, single-payer healthcare isn't going to happen because a community hospital goes on strike or even shuts down or doesn't. I know you've been, you're on the board of United Working Families, which is, I think, not affiliated with the National United Working Families, just to be clear, but it has a similar name. Might be the same name, but that's
WFP versus UWF.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you for that clarification. But my question though is, it's a number. Could you tell people what United Working Families is? It's some labor and community groups that have come together, and what the goals of that are, and why, how that affects your political action in SEIU healthcare, Illinois, Indiana, Missouri, and Kansas.
I think UWF was formed out of a recognition that the Democratic Party was limited in what it could do in terms of improving the lives of working families, particularly here in Chicago and more broadly in Illinois. As you mentioned, it's a coalition of labor as well as community organizations. And SEIU Healthcare was one of the original founders, along with CTU and other community groups of UWF. And initially, it was about electoral power and making sure that we elected candidates who would be accountable to working people. And we've made some significant progress over the years as a coalition, and it's allowed us really to push the envelope and make sure that we are able to support the candidate. But ultimately, we've been successful at lifting up those issues that concern working people. And still challenges persist because it's all about money and politics, unfortunately. But we've really, I think, changed the way in which politics functions in this city. And we've made some enemies along the way, but we're really happy with what we've been able to accomplish. We've done lobbying at city council level, done some stuff in Springfield, but it really is an independent political organization that is a democratically run organization, and we're proud of the work that we've done so far, and we look forward to more work in the future.
I mean, it's like looking at electoral politics in the United States. It's you have Democrats and Republicans Republicans, they're used to, potentially, you can argue whether there was a pro-labor section there, but certainly that doesn't seem to exist anymore if it ever did. But then within the Democrats, people, there's these fights for, good Democrats, bad Democrats. I don't know, are people that you think are good, and it seems to vacillate. And the money issue seems to be an important piece of that.
I don't think we talk about that part enough, to be honest with you.
Go ahead. Why don't you say a little bit about it now?
The role of money in our politics. I think obviously we have a robust political program as a union, as well as UWF. We focus a lot on getting our members to contribute to politics, but we just don't have the type of money that the corporations and their lobbyists have, right? But for me, the real question for our democracy, if you will, is how are we going to address the role of money? Because in a lot of ways we get frustrated with Democrats, rightly so. But we must be clear, a lot of it is just driven simply by money. And unless we're able to mobilize enough people power to go against organized money, we just have no chance. And so it's important that we understand we need to reform the ways in which our campaigns are run. That means money must be regulated better. And obviously Citizens United from our Supreme Court just threw open the door to unregulated money. But we need to, as anyone who cares about democracy, you don't have to care about democracy. If you care about fairness, we need to really look at how money is raised and spent on politics and how we are all impacted by that.
So let me. I want to go back to this issue about the two-party system and looking at independent politics. Is there a need for a third party, or is there? I mean, this is a debate that goes on. Or can the Democratic Party be reformed, given all the because rich people aren't just in the Republican Party; they're in the Democratic Party as well.
That's a good question. The younger political science student of me would say we need more than a third. We need 4 or 5 or 6 parties. I'm not sure anymore. I was at a meeting, and Dorian Warren, who you may know, Centers for Community Change, old poli-sci professor at Columbia, really explained how the country changed in 1931 to 1936. So 1931, Republicans mostly in power, Hooverism very much on the ascent, if you will. Just after the crash of 29, Republicans controlled everything. Black voters voted as Republicans. And he made the point that from 31 to 36, Black voters started voting Democrat. The Democrats took over the Senate with a 77-seat majority in the course of 5 years. And what that said to me, and I was it made me remember that the Democratic Party was forced to change. And so now I think less about if it's a number, if it's 5 parties, 2 parties, or 3. It's about picking one of them, for crying out loud, and holding them accountable. It's about organizing from the bottom. It could be the Socialist Party. The point is, it's through organizing people, regardless of the name of a party, that's going to make the type of change that we need. And of course, coming out of 36, the New Deal and so many other things that we rely on today, on Taft-Hartley, Wagner. I mean, so many things came out of what happened in that period from 31 to 36. And so to my mind, it's less about the name or the number. It's about what we do on the ground to build.
No, that's a good point. And people were marching in the streets, veterans, unemployed, and organized labor, the number of unionized people. between 1931 and 1936, or people that had collective bargaining agreements, absolutely just went through the ceiling. And so it's on us, it's on working people to make those things happen. You told me the story, and I hope you'll tell it to our listeners again, about some of your members in Ferguson, and this is after Michael Brown was killed. And I'm thinking of organizing on the streets, and certainly militant organizing in Ferguson that led to so many things later on. But people, our Fight Back radio listeners know we've had some people on here previously speak about community control of the police. But tell us the story about your members in Ferguson and how that changed your union and others as well.
Yeah, quite a few of our members live in Ferguson. There was a nursing home in Ferguson. We have quite a few members that live and work in St. Louis and the overall St. Louis County area. And so when Michael Brown was murdered, our members were in those streets marching. They were organizing amongst each other to do things. And they said, well, we want our union to step up and be a part of this. They challenged us from below. And again, as you said, it transformed our union. We've always sort of been involved in community work, police oversight, policing reform, but it really supercharged our work because our members were demanding it. I would add that it also impacted our international union, perhaps not in the same way, but they were organized and pushing and engaged. We live in Ferguson. We live in St. Louis. We're all union members. We demanded our union stand up and take a position. And that's what we've been doing in Chicago around ECPS and police reform and accountability. That's been important work for us. It isn't simply about police accountability. We believe, and our members believe, that they have the right to live in a safe community. And that's all a part of the organizing that they had been doing for decades. And so, we're proud of that work. That work obviously is still continuing, unfortunately, but it really did come out of the murder of Michael Brown and the anger and organizing that our members were doing on the ground.
So when people say that community control of the police, this is not a trade union issue. Why are you spending your members' dues money on this kind? I know they do. How do you respond to those people?
Well, because our members demand it, the overwhelming majority of them demand it, but it's also the way, just simply how our members are organized. And, they talk to each other, they share each other's struggles, and they see their union as a vehicle by which they can improve their lives. In fact, that's what part of what our mission and our vision is, that our union really should be a place where people can realize the dreams and aspirations that they have for each other. And it's not enough simply to improve wages for workers if they can't feel safe in their communities. And so it's really a reflection of the work and the lives that they live on a regular and daily basis. And so we were involved in fighting to make sure that Anita Alvarez, a former state's attorney, was kicked out. We were a part of the effort to make sure.
That's after the Laquan McDonald
situation
here in Chicago.
That's right. So our members understand, and it's in part because of who they are, right? They live in these communities. They experience the lack of respect from certain parts of law enforcement. They understand that community is where they get their strength as union members. And so they want to strengthen their communities. And the union is just one of the vehicles by which they're able to do that. And it just so happens that when they build their community, they have greater strength vis-a-vis their employers and their bosses, as it turns out.
So looking at our communities here in Chicago, or probably across the country, that may be the same thing, I'm not sure. But, the black community, and other peoples of colors communities, and we're heavily segregated here, have been disempowered, haven't had the same kind of power, and frankly, that's in our labor movement. That's historically been reflected too. You would look and see lots of old white guys in the photos of or union magazines and such like that. And some of that has started to change, and you're part of that change, in fact. But could you talk about some of the black leaders of the labor movement, both here in Chicago and nationally, and what do you think why that is, and what does that mean?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Chicago has always had some number of strong black labor leaders. Organizationally, they were challenged. There's a reason the A. Philip Randolph Museum is here in Chicago, for example. But it goes on and on. Charlie Hayes, Addie Wyatt, so many people. The Coalition of Black Trade Unionists was founded here in Chicago at a convention 50 or so years ago now. And so that's our sort of legacy. But there are folks who are building on it, like my sister Stacey Davis Gates from Chicago Teachers Union. You have outstanding leaders like Mac Julian, Keith Richardson, who are postal worker labor leaders. We've got Diane Palmer from Local 73 of SEIU. I could go on and on, but we are, I think, in a way, seeing a growth in the numbers of black labor leaders in the city of Chicago. It's not because they were chosen. It's because after many years, they've amassed support, and their members have said, we want that person to be the leader because we believe they are the best person for the job right now. And so it's a lot of excitement in the labor movement, particularly among black labor leaders. In Chicago recently, when we were able to pass police oversight, I think it was important that black labor leaders weighed in with the city council on this thing. The chair of the Black Caucus of the city council said as much. He said it was important to him that he heard from black labor leaders. We heard that from a whole bunch of elected officials and alder folk. And so it's an interesting moment that we're in. Labor movement also is an interesting moment and at a crossroads. And so it needs to be more inclusive. If it's going to stay relevant and strong, it needs to continue to have the leadership reflect the membership. That would be my take on it. After 20 some years in the labor movement, I can say it has changed quite a bit. More leaders of color, and in some ways, it's gotten younger. And those are all important things as we look towards the future and making sure that we have a strong labor movement. So,
how did you become a labor leader? It's I've asked some other guests how they've gotten involved. It's you don't, in kindergarten say I want to be the head of a healthcare union. And what's your story? How'd you end up where you are?
Well, I have always sort of been an activist involved in politics. I was that kid who ran for 8th grade class president, edited my high school paper, always was opinionated, went to college, did a lot of student government stuff, president of Black Student Union. Had no idea really what I wanted to do other than go to law school. So after undergrad, I came home and I worked for Cook County Clerk's office. SEIU had tried to organize before, unsuccessfully, and came back to organize despite some reservation on my part because I thought unions were racist. And I tell people that story. I really was not involved, but it was people like Bruce Dixon, people like Paul Waterhouse, one of my white co-workers, who said, Greg, you should get involved and help do this. And I did. We won that election, sat on my first bargaining committee, and I think I probably caught whatever bug it was at the bargaining table. It was the first time that I could see the real impact of workers coming together. I had an idea around affirmative action and the need for more opportunities for workers of color in the office to progress. And we were able to get that language in our contract. We used affirmative action back then. There's other words we use today. But that was really my first real working example as an adult of seeing people come together to fight. And so I became a really active union steward. And then the president of the union at the time, who actually happened to be a black man, which was extremely rare then, asked me to take a leave of absence and do some organizing, won a campaign, asked me to join staff. And here we are 24 years later, member, organizer, political director, vice president, secretary, treasurer, and today, president of SEIU Healthcare, Illinois, Indiana.
So let me ask you then, your union, SEIU, made some bold, Andy Stern was the international president, and there was, some bold moves here and there. They left the AFL-CIO. And organized labor is different now. We have organizing drives at Starbucks, at Amazon, places I wouldn't have dreamed of even just 3 years ago. What should our vision look like, and how should we be, as a labor movement? What kinds of things should we be tackling? What kinds of vision should we have?
So trying all kinds of things. One of the most fascinating things about the Amazon organizing was that they weren't organized through some national union, right? It was workers there deciding that they were going to do their own thing. And we were able to support them, the labor movement writ large, because labor unions tend to have some resources. And I think that's a model, supporting the type of organizing that's happening on the ground with resources and people. And so wherever we can be supportive of the type of organizing that's happening like that, we should do it. But it also means, doubling and tripling down on our commitment to organizing workers that we already have some access to. So we're organizing nursing home workers. We're organizing hospital workers. We need to be doubling and tripling down on that. It's not going to look like it looked like 20 years, even when I started 20 years ago. And so we need to develop new models. But really, it isn't about the top down, me or the union leaders leading it. It's about the workers on the ground and offering us the type of support that they need, but also getting them in rooms and in conversations with workers that are already in unions, which is what we intentionally try to do. Because the stories that they tell each other about their work makes them all stronger. They can support each other's work. And so it's going to be trying a whole bunch of different things. Starbucks organizing, very similar to Amazon in the sense that there was no one union sort of doing all the work. In fact, Workers United, which is affiliated with SEIU, you would know that they were actually involved because there's something that's happening. The energy is all built from the ground up. Workers United is offering, SEIU is offering support and resources. And then it means organizing every type of worker. Used to be you'd only organize certain types of workers. And, SEIU says unions for all. Whether you are an adjunct professor or a home care worker or you work at Starbucks or Amazon, you should have the right to form the union. And so that means obviously putting pressure on corporations. We think it also means changes in laws, whether it's at the state or federal or local level. But it's not going to look how it looked in the 80s or the 90s. And we should be open to however it shows up to offer the type of support that's needed. And also do it in a sectoral way. Historically, we've done it, shop to shop. But we need to organize industry-wide, build strength throughout an entire sector. That's, how the UAW got so strong. That's how unions in Europe historically have operated. And I think we need to take the best of all those things and apply them where they can be maximized the most.
Yeah, and clearly our enemies are going to try to stop us. We see the Supreme Court making decision after decision, making the laws more difficult. Let me ask you about militant tactics, something that your union hasn't shied away from. I saw recently that the Teamsters elected a new national president who was talking about Amazon, said, well, at UPS we need to he was insinuating a possible strike a year from now. And if we succeed there, that'll attract people. It's like, why would somebody want to join a union where things aren't that much better, or it just is, you're only going to take out your union dues. And so could you talk a little bit about militant tactics and how that fits in with winning actually things that will be attractive to workers that are not union right now?
Strikes and other actions work. As I mentioned earlier, nursing home workers in particular recently really showed how organizing, striking, sitting down, withholding labor really gets the attention of employers. Sometimes you have to strike, but you should never be afraid to strike, even though it's scary. But workers understand that their real power is in their ability to come together and withhold labor. And so we need to continue to remind workers of that. Always tell our members, yes, we're smarter than the boss. We play chess games at the table, at the bargaining table, just as good or as better than them. But it truly is the ability of workers to come together and show the boss that we have the interests of all of our workers together, and we're prepared to do whatever it takes to get what we deserve. That's what moves them. That's how you get the raises. That's how you get the wins that you need. It isn't simply playing chess games with the boss. You have to do that. That's an important part of the process. But they also need to know that you aren't afraid to withhold your labor to get what you want or get what you need.
And so to withhold our labor, to be willing to go on strike, you really need a solid, broad unity within the workplace, or if you're somewhat you're calling for, within the industry. I want to circle back to something you said earlier. You mentioned that when you were a young black man that you thought labor unions were racist. Why did you think that, first off? And is it better now? I mean, hopefully your union is with you in leadership, but that's just not something that dropped from the sky. There's a real basis for that as well.
That's right. I think, aside from just looking at who's leading them, I think there's a real way in which the interests of workers of color have been sidelined in the labor movement. And there's a way in which the interests and their concerns are just completely ignored, that I think so many black workers, even though most black workers support unions, philosophically, they don't see a place for themselves. And I think that's been a mistake. And I think that it's changing. We have a long ways to go, but there has been some progress on that front. I think, at the polling, when you talk to black workers, they know that black folks in unions tend to do better. There's a huge wage difference, union difference for black workers that are in unions that aren't. My entire generation, came up in that period. My parents were both in unions. It built the black middle class in a real way. People know the story of Dr. King being in Memphis organizing sanitation workers. It's a powerful thing that I think most black folks understand, but haven't always still felt welcome in the labor movement. And so I think what we've tried to do, certainly in my local, is to turn that on its head. But in part, just again, because of who we are, it's in our DNA. We understand the importance of being inclusive, but you've got to be intentional about it. I know that there are some white labor leaders who get it, who want to improve things. And again, there has been some progress, but it has to be backed up with real action. There has to be some support. There has to be an emphasis on the things that, black workers care about. And so we continue to tell that story. I think, again, as I mentioned earlier, a lot more diversity in the leadership ranks in the labor movement here in Chicago. So we're making some progress. I would also add the lack of focus on young people is also a challenge for us. The country's changing. The demographics of the country are changing. So the labor movement must make sure that it's speaking to the interests of Black workers, of Latino workers, of Asian workers, because that's the future of the country. And our younger people tend to be now more people of color. And so if we're going to really build a strong movement, it has to be inclusive, and it has to just listen and speak to those things that they hear.
So let me ask you about something that may fit with this, but also even broader than this, I think. Your union has put out a call for universal child care. And this is a demand that I'm certain will capture the imagination of working class people across this country who are struggling to deal with this, and even people that are unable to work because of cost and other things. Is this just pie in the sky? It seems like an awfully big demand. And how do you approach this as in terms of trying to make it a reality?
It is a big demand. The fight for 15 was a big demand. It took us a long time, longer than we would have liked to get here, but nobody talks and says 15 is too much anymore. And so we try to create a vision of what we want the world to be. And we think that childcare is foundational to a functioning country. And if you don't have access, given the fact that people work every day, they need childcare. And so for us, it's also about those workers who provide that work as well. So we represent childcare providers who get paid less than minimum wage. And so if we're going to really give the country the type of future that it needs, we need to invest in childcare. And so, yes, we're saying universal childcare for all. It's a benefit for the entire country. It creates a more stable workforce. It allows parents to work without worrying about their kids. I think, in a place like Chicago, where everyone's always talking about violence, we need to make sure that we give an early start to our kids of stability in a quality childcare situation, or so they can learn and get the type of support that they need, so that we can disrupt, the cradle to prison pipeline. It's about what our society needs for the future in order to be stable, and in order to be successful for all of our young people. We need to make sure that childcare is available for all. So we're very, very passionate about that. And by the way, there's enough money in our country to do it.
Yeah, the CEO of Northwestern seemed to contribute a little bit more to this, huh?
Well, the funny thing, of all people on the planet, Elon Musk said that he was going to now start paying for childcare for Tesla employees. And that's because he's got a bunch of kids, apparently now, too. But if he can say it, we should be able to do it as a country.
No, that's true. The money and the resources are there, and it's something that's definitely needed. Our time is running out. Is there anything else you'd like to add to tell Fight Back viewers?
Yeah, I think we are in an interesting point. We've been in a bunch of interesting points these last 4 or 5 years as a country, and obviously a labor movement. Biden deserves some credit. I think what he's done at the National Labor Relations Board, some of the appointments that he's made, really, I think, has, created a lot more interest in organizing. We have really historic numbers at the Labor Board around organizing. So I'll give him some credit for that. But we also need to do more at the federal level in Congress to make sure, as well as President Biden, to make sure that workers have the real voice that they need in this moment. And again, it's not because it's the right thing to do. It's because it will benefit all of us. And I think that if we focus on organizing workers, using collective power of workers, the country tends to do better. And so that's what we need to do for the future.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Greg.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes.
Thank you.
There you go. Greg Kelley, president of SEIU Healthcare, Illinois, Indiana, Missouri, and Kansas. 90,000 strong. And it's I want to thank Greg. He's a busy guy. He's a big shot, I guess you would say, in the labor movement, and so his time is valuable. And for him to come on Fight Back Radio and talk to us, we're really appreciative. So thank you, Greg, and thank you to all of the Service Employees International Union and the work they do around healthcare. I want to give a shout out again to all working class people in the country, but especially our healthcare workers as we celebrate Labor Day this year. For those that are interested in reaching SEIU Healthcare, you can at SEIUHCILIN.org. And then at Instagram, they're at SEIUHCII. On Twitter, if you want to reach Greg or follow him, it's Greg Kelley. That's Kelly with EY. So Greg, Kelley, SEIU. And then on Facebook, they're at SEIU Healthcare IL, the IN. And we're going to put all this in the show notes so you can find it. And if you want to reach Fight Back Radio, or if you want to reach me, you can at richard.fightbackradio@gmail.com. And, again, we want to encourage people to, tell a friend, subscribe, like, tweet. We get the word out there, and write a comment. Look for us on Facebook. All these things help people find us. And thank you again to Greg Kelley. And then finally, I want to thank our production team, Vince Olson and Shane Tremley, who make all of this happen. So for our entire Fight Back Radio team, I'm Richard Berg, saying until next time, all power to the people.